Hello, my name is Susan Ehlert and I am your professor for the first 7 weeks of this course. This is our first lecture and it's covering the first chapter within your textbook. Basically, this lecture is all about giving you an introduction to what HR management is all about. In this lecture, we'll cover the following topics. I'll introduce you to the concept of human resource management. Then we'll go into talking about all the different functions that are included under the umbrella of human resource management. I'll introduce you to different roles that are correlated with HRM. And then we'll talk about some major trends that are impacting HR. What is human resource management? Basically, it's a set of integrated policies and procedures and programs that companies put into place to help influence and manage the attitudes, behaviors, and performance of their staff. The idea is to try to direct employee action and performance to align it to the strategic goals of the organization. For example, suppose you're running a service organization like hotels, and what one of your important strategies is to deliver the best in customer service. So you'll want to create policies that promote your employees to engage in attitudes and behaviors that are aligned with excellence in customer service. The human resource management function comprises of a lot of different activities. You can see on this slide all the different functions that are included in human resource management, from recruitment and selection of staff, personnel administration, training and development, performance and rewards management, talent management, succession and career planning, labor relations, and HR planning. What does the human resource function actually include? So, one of the two most important things that we do as HR specialists is we attempt to attract and retain top talent to our organization. Once we have attracted and hired top talent, we try to design programs that will effectively manage the performance of our staff so that they are motivated and engaged. We will also be involved with designing programs that orientate new staff to the company, train staff on the skills to do the job that they're currently employed to do. And then we will also design programs to develop staff so that they can do alternate or different jobs within our organization. For example, one of the companies that I worked for, we designed a leadership development program. And we would identify staff that we thought had management potential, and we would put them through the training program to help them develop the management skills, so that when leadership roles opened up within our organization, we could promote them into those positions. It's also important for HR personnel to be aware of the different laws that regulate the organization within the jurisdiction that they work. So there's always a number of different laws that we have to pay attention to, and as leaders of organizations or as managers or as HR professionals, we cannot be ignorant to the law. We need to be proactive and make sure that we are upholding the laws of the state. It's also important for us to maintain the health and wellness and the safety of all of our staff. And there are particular laws within Canada that outline our obligations to health and safety in the workplace. It's also an important role in human resource management to both design and manage the compensation systems for our employees. There's going to be instances where employees will decide to organize themselves as a group in order to negotiate a collective agreement or a collective contract with the organization. And so we get into the domain of what we call labor relations and unionization. So human resource would also manage the labor relations, collective agreements, and contract negotiations. There are several different HR roles that you can go into. So somebody that takes on the role of HR generalist would undertake all the different functions of HR, from staffing, performance management, human relations, training and development. All of those different components of HR are included in the HR generalist role. Or you can become a specialist in HR. So somebody that works in the capacity of a learning and development specialist would be training and designing training for your organization. If you're a compensation benefits specialist, you'll be engaged in designing pay structures for your company. If you are pension and benefits, you may be a specialist in establishing and setting up a pension plan for your company and the administration of benefits within your organization. You could also take on the role of a disability management specialist. So if anybody become injured in the course of work, you would be working with that employee to set up accommodations for their impairment, or if they are off ill or off work for a number of days or weeks because of their disability, you will be working with staff and the organization on how best to accommodate to help them to return to work. Another job in HR is called a talent acquisition specialist, and that is a very fancy word for someone who is engaged in the work of finding staff to fill vacant roles within the company. So it's all about advertising jobs and setting up testing and selection processes for hiring the right person in the job. You can also take on the role of a health and safety specialist. And so that's somebody who is, as you might have guessed, primarily occupied with assessing the environment, the work environment, and making sure that all safety hazards are eliminated or at least controlled, to make sure that staff are trained to engage in work safe practices. They're also looking to follow the legislation and make sure that we're compliant with all the occupational health and safety laws. If you're an HR payroll specialist, you might be engaged in the administration of staff payroll. There's also jobs called rewards and recognition specialists, and those individuals will be involved with designing programs for the express purpose of recognizing staff's contributions to the organization. And finally, the last specialist role would be a labor relations officer. So that's somebody who works to advise the organization how best to deal with employees who decide to organize themselves and form a union, and how to engage in negotiations of a collective agreement with the unionized employees. Finally, roles can be acquired in leadership of HR. So there are managements of HR and VPs of HR. So generally those people are more strategic in their role. They're looking to work with the executive leadership of the organization to align the programs that they design for staff to make sure they're promoting and supporting the strategies of the business. So there are three basic umbrella terms that we use to the different types of roles that human resources conduct. So we have administrative roles, operational and employee advocacy roles, and we have strategic roles. We also, I want to call to your attention that there has been an evolution of human resource practices over time. So businesses have been around for the millennium. So people have organized themselves to engage in transactions, selling goods and services for fees for many, many years. But we haven't always had the formal practice of human resources, although people have always engaged in some type of human resource practice. It wasn't until sort of the late 1800s and early 1900s that you saw within organizations people that were dedicated to managing human resources, to managing the staff within their companies. It really came about with the Industrial Revolution. So those early 1900s, you started to see within companies what we would call the personnel office. Usually these roles were highly administrative and meant to support management. They didn't necessarily engage in the strategy of managing people. They were more transactional and administrative in processes. So in those early days of HR, companies started to recognize that there were costs associated with accidents in the workplace and with turnover of staff. So turnover is when people leave voluntarily or we have to terminate them because they don't work out. So we started to recognize that if you had a lot of turnover in companies and a lot of health and safety accidents, that led to increased costs to the organization. So businesses says, okay, so we need to be more strategic around those practices. And so they started to set up offices within the organization to help support those tasks. So that was the beginning of HR. Then into the 1930s and the 1950s, in the colleges and universities, they started to do research around labor relations and managing staff. So you saw in the economics department and labor relations, people starting to study and focus their energy on how could we best manage our people within our organization. Because about that time, we started to learn a little bit more about the psychology of people and how to motivate them. So you saw that changing within the practices of organizations, and you saw people that were being hired to deal with union and labor relations, as well as people hired specifically the purpose of training staff so that they could perform optimally within the organization, and also to help managers manage their staff effectively. So this is the emergence of what we call operational and employee advocacy. Then into the 1960s, we have the emergence of what we call organizational behavior. And that's when psychology started to look at the organization and how can we influence people? How can we influence them and set up our organizations so that they'll really be motivated to do their job and they'll act to increase their productivity for the company? And so that's when we begin to see that there are certain laws of behavior that we can implement to sort of motivate and shape the attitudes and behavior of our staff. And this is also the emergence of what we call strategic human resource management, where we have staff that take on the role of HR personnel, and they work with the leadership of the organization to say, okay, so what can we do to get people really engaged and satisfied with their job, where they want to stay with the company, but also they want to really do the best for our organization. So as I said, there's 3 domains of HR. There's the administrative role. So administrative roles will primarily be occupied with things like benefits administration, training, payroll service, retirement and pension planning, staffing. So that's some more just your day-to-day operations of HR. Then we have the employee advocacy or operational roles. And here we're starting to look at not just hiring and training our staff to do their jobs, but what kinds of programs can we implement that make our organization sort of a better place to work, where people want to stay with us, and that they'll give us our top performance, and that those behaviors are aligned to the strategy. So we see also in that area, we're looking to make sure that we're paying attention to the laws and being compliant with the strategic legal framework for the jurisdiction with which we're working in. And so finally, the final role of HR is strategic management. So up till now, administrative and operational roles are more reactionary. So, when we see a job vacancy come open, then that triggers a need to hire. So that's us reacting to a need. In strategy, we're trying to be more proactive. And that is sort of the trend in HR now, that we be more strategic, so that we're not, that we're ahead of the game. So that, for example, instead of waiting for a vacancy to happen in our company before we do hiring, what maybe we should be doing is tracking which jobs in our company have the greatest turnover, so that we can start to anticipate where we will need to do hiring in the future. So for example, if I'm working in the banking industry and I notice on an annual basis I have turnover of my teller positions of 50%, that means that I know that I should expect within the next year that I will need to hire at least half of my roles. I'll have to replace half of my teller roles. So I shouldn't wait until those roles become vacant. I should start to advertise and recruit from them early, so that I can get the best people and not just be satisfied with the best candidates I get if I just recruit last minute. In HR, especially in Canada, it's more and more going to the necessity that you have certification as an HR professional. So in Canada, each province has a governing body for the HR profession. In Ontario, we have what's called the Human Resource Professional Association, and they are the certification granting body. So we have actually 3 levels of certification in Ontario. We have the CHRP, the CHRL, and the CHRE. The CHRP is the entry-level certification to be an HR professional in Ontario. It requires a degree or diploma in business. It also requires that you take 9 of the required courses with a 70% average, with no mark below 65%. And then they have a comprehensive examination that you have to take to get your CHRP, as well as being registered with the HRPA Association. To get the CHRL, which is the Certified Human Resource Leader designation, you have to have already achieved your CHRP, but then they have an experience requirement. So you have to have worked for at least 3 years in an HR role, and you have to have engaged in over 60 hours of professional development and be registered with the professional body before you will be granted with the CHRL certification. So as I said before, in Ontario and in all of the provinces across Canada, more and more of the HR roles that are being posted within organizations are requiring these CHRP's designation. So CHRP is basically your entry level, and it stands for Certified Human Resource Professional. And the CHRL and CHRE are the more advanced HR professional designations. Your CHRL is usually people that work in leadership in HR. And the CRE is the executive designation. So you have to have worked at the executive level to obtain your CHRE. So you have to be at the VP level to get that designation. What's the importance of these designations? A big part of the role of being an HR professional within an organization is that the expectation is that you are upholding organizational ethics within the company as it pertains to how they manage their staff. So you're expected to follow a set of principles and values, both that are established by the company as well as what is established by the HRPA, the Human Resource Professional Association of the province that you work in. Why our ethics are so important? First of all, employees and potential candidates to an organization will look at the ethical practices of the organization to decide first if they want to work for you as a business or if they want to stay and continue to work with you. If employees feel that an organization is not ethical and they believe that they don't treat their customers or their staff well, they will not be attracted or they will not want to work for that particular organization. So ethics is so important in terms of the brand of the organization to be able to attract top talent. So it's a component of employee retention, so keeping your staff, engaging them, and motivated. There's nothing more disengaging or nothing that will lead to greater discontentment amongst your staff than if they believe that their leaders, their managers are not treating them fairly and equitably. So ethics is a big part of our advocacy role in HR, that we are helping to train management so that they do operate with ethical practice. Furthermore, the laws and the regulations that govern the management of people within an organization are based and founded on organizational ethics. So we not only have a corporate social responsibility to uphold ethics, we also have an ethical responsibility. Now, there are some challenges that human resource professionals do encounter in managing staff in a contemporary organization. And these are not challenges that are just restricted to HR professionals. These are also challenges to the organization as a whole, to leadership, and to management. Six of the most contemporary challenges include the movement towards globalization of organizations, diversity, demographics, occupational shifts, cost containments, work-life balance, and what's not on here, and I think should be also part of the list, is artificial intelligence and the virtual world. Especially today, while we're going through COVID, we are seeing so many organizations responding to COVID by moving their operations to the virtual platform, where staff are working remotely, and with that, we have particular unique challenges as to how can we as managers and as organizations effectively manage our people in a virtual workplace. So in the global context, we have many multinational agreements that different countries have signed on to that allow for the free trade of goods and services between countries. And in some of those agreements, we also see the free flow of people between nations. So this has created this very agile, very flexible workforce. So for example, the European Union is a free trade agreement. So within that agreement, not only do you see the movements of goods and services amongst countries that have signed on to the European Union, but you also see citizens from the countries of the EU moving between countries for jobs. So I could be managing a company in Germany and have hired staff from Spain or Portugal. So with this globalization of the workforce, we will see a very diverse workforce have a diverse work composition. So the people that are working for us come from a variety of different nationalities, different ethnicities. Diversity means a lot of things. It means gender, it means religion, it means race, it means a sexual orientation, family, style. And in Canada, we are one of the first countries to have a national diversity policy. So in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we recognize the equality amongst diverse populations. And not only that, we have introduced a law called employment equity that requires that employers, especially federally regulated companies, have diversity represented in their workforce. So diversity can also mean differences in ages. So the interesting thing that has happened and evolved in the workplace is that we have quite a diverse age group in our workplace, because in Canada we have no mandatory retirement age. In other words, people can work for as long as they want. Traditionally in Canada, the retirement age is 65, but you could decide at 65 that you don't want to retire, that you want to keep on working. So what that has meant for the workforce is that people are staying a lot longer in their jobs. They're not retiring as early as they used to. So that means that you can have 20-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds all working together. And the challenge of that for HR practitioners is that in those age groups, we're in a different stage in our life cycle. So in my 20s, I might be still taking college courses or university courses. I might not be married yet. Perhaps I don't have a house yet. So my needs are going to be very different than, say, if I'm in my 50s and maybe my children are up and growing, and at that point I'm starting to think about I'd like to retire, or maybe my health is failing a little bit and I need to have more medications or more doctor's visits. So from an HR perspective, I have to understand that people in these different age groups have different wants and needs when it comes to benefits and packages that I design for staff, as well as those different generations have different different value systems based on the experiences they've had when they've grown up. And so their work styles will be different. And so how I manage their performance will be different based on the age cohort that they belong to. So, for example, people that are part of the baby boomer generation have tended to be more loyal to a workplace and have had a career and often working for the same organization their entire working life. Whereas people in Gen X or Gen Y have seen more movement and they tend to bounce around more to different jobs. So understanding those differences can help us more effectively manage our personnel. Another shift or trend in HR is that we've seen a shift in the types of occupations that exist in the labor workforce. So if you look at organizations globally and particularly in developed nations, you've seen an explosion of the service sector. In fact, the greatest growth in organizations and in jobs have been within the service sector. In fact, 70% of Canadian jobs exist in the service sector, and services can be anything from health professionals, engineers, biotech, education, hospitality. But that's where the growth of jobs are. And so from an HR professional, it's important for me to follow this because I need to understand, okay, so where are the job growth going to be? And what are the skills that are needed for those jobs? And so what should I be recruiting for to fill those positions in the future, if that's where the growth is going to be? So a lot of growth in terms of new occupations have been in the data analytics or the tech components of organizations. So a lot of hiring in IT and people who are able to manage big data. So that means that for recruitment purposes, I know that those are the kinds of jobs and the kinds of skills that we need within the organization. So I'm going to need to start to look for people that possess those kinds of skills. So 20 years ago, I can't believe it's already been 20 years, but in 2000, the Conference Board of Canada got together with major organizations within Canada to sort of address this. What are the occupational skills that are needed for the millennium? And so these companies, along with the Canadian Conference Board, said that really there's 3 categories of staff that are of skills that are really important for employees in the future. And they have identified them as fundamental skills, personal management skills, and teamwork skills. So as you can see, they're all in the soft skills domain. So they said that really jobs and organizations are changing so much that it's not so important to, hire people for technical skills, but to hire people based on their soft skills. So soft skills are like for fundamental, like communication, managing information, being able to use numbers, being able to solve problems. In personal management, it's the attitudes and behaviors, being able to be adaptable and responsible, to continuously learn. In terms of teamwork, do they work well with others? Because when we hire staff for these types of soft skills, then if things change within our organization, if the technology changes, I know that I have hired somebody that will adapt well to those changes within those organizations. There's nothing more difficult than to have a group of staff that are resistant to change, that don't want to adapt to new technology, that who want to stay in the old way of using the old software and the old ways of doing things. In today's organizations, they need to be managed so that they are adaptable and agile to the external environment. And so that means that we have to hire staff that can adapt to those changes. Another trend in organizational management has been this cost containment strategy that organizations have taken on. So moving into the global environment has meant that companies have much more competition from other organizations. Whether it's domestically or internationally, they're faced with other companies that are able to do it better and cheaper and faster. So in response to that, companies have had to work more leanly. So they've looked to see, how can we contain the costs? How can we make things cheaper in our operations so that we can cut down the costs of our goods and our services to the customer? Now, one of the biggest costs within an organization are our labor costs. Labor costs can account from between 30 and 60% of our overall operational budget, depending on the kind of organization that you're working for. If it's high-end service, very like in hoteling or restaurants, in those types of operations, your labor costs are very large because you have a lot of staff. But if you're in manufacturing, where you have a lot of technology and AI augmented with humans operating that technology, your staff levels are going to be lower, so your operational costs will be lower. In any case, staffing is expensive. And so that's almost always the first line of attack when organizations are trying to reduce their expenses so that they can continue to be competitive in a global environment. So as HR, we're looking to come up with strategies to help to reduce the cost of labor. So we've some of the strategies that we've used are things like downsizing and right sizing. So downsizing simply means reducing the size or the number of staff that you have. We use this term right sizing. In other words, sometimes we'll redesign the job. So we'll change the job description so that it will job will do more tasks and more activities. So that we don't have to hire as many people. So we'll have one individual that can do a number of jobs and can multitask. So I think about hospitals, for example. I remember when they were trying to downsize their occupational and physical therapist roles. So one of the ways that they did it is they called it right sizing, and they combined the role of occupational therapist and physiotherapist into one job. So one person would do both functions. So they would call them a physical therapist assistant. So they didn't necessarily just do physical, occupational, they had to do both of those activities. And that's the way hospitals were able to contain some of their costs, by redesigning the job description. We could also do something called furloughing, and that's where we may temporarily lay off staff when we see the demand for goods and services be reduced. So, for example, here in St. Catharines, we have a car manufacturer called General Motors, and they will furlough their staff for a couple weeks in the summer and at Christmas to kind of match the demand for cars in the marketplace. So they don't need everybody always in constant production of cars, so they'll lay staff off. So that's called furloughing. We can do employee leasing, and that is where we just hire somebody for specific contract on a short-term basis, or we'll maybe borrow an employee from another organization. So this is an example of this is a company that I used to work for. They had two types of businesses under their corporate structure. One was in gaming, the other one was in and entertainment, gaming entertainment, like, so they produce television shows. And we had a couple of people, salespeople, that were shared between those two organizations. So the salary was shared, so it made that employee a little cheaper. And that's what we call employee leasing. We can also outsource. And outsourcing is that maybe some of the functions within your business we contract to other companies. So I used to work for Canadian Tire, which is call center, and they also do retailing in Canada. And we did not hire our own security staff for our facilities. We outsourced that. So we would negotiate a contract with companies that specialized in security, and they would bring in their security staff to secure our premises. So that would be called outsourcing. So we just pay the company and they manage their staff and staff our security at our company. Offshoring is when we take a component of our business and we move it to another country. So in some countries, their minimum wages are lower than other countries, so it might be more cost efficient to do, for example, the production of goods in another country where their minimum wage is cheaper than, say, the country where the corporate head office is located. So a lot of American companies will do offshoring. Apple and some of the mobile companies, mobile phone companies will do that. So, for example, Apple does offshore the production of their phones. So they do all the marketing and the designing of the phones in the United States, but they do the production of the phones in some countries, different countries, where labor costs are cheaper. Other cost containments could be that we may decide that we don't have as many facilities, so we close some plants and we just decide to bring everything under one building. Or another strategy is to just not have a physical premises at all. to run your company completely remotely, which is what we're seeing in COVID, where we're seeing companies saying, okay, well, this remote working is it's functioning well. Our employees are productive. Maybe we don't actually need offices. Maybe all of our staff can work from home. So that could be a way to cost and contain costs, or we can re-engineer how we do work. So we might eliminate certain positions and replace them with technology. So for example, McDonald's has, when you go into the McDonald's restaurants in Ontario, you may see some online menu boards, and that's an example of re-engineering where they have replaced cashiers in their stores, and instead customers can come in and order their meal virtually on a screen, and then it'll come to a counter. And so that's a way and then we've also used contract workers. So people come and work for us for a set duration, when the business is busy. And then we will, when we don't need their services anymore, we can let them go without any costs related to termination and severance. Or another strategy might be where companies will merge with another one, where you might have a lateral merger. So I think about Disney and Pixar. That's a lateral merger where they're both in the entertainment business, and they both make movies, animated movies, and they see the advantages of bringing those two businesses together to kind of control costs and also to expand and kind of dominate the market. Another and final challenge to HR practitioner is this desire for a balance between work and life for our employees. A lot of the surveys that are being conducted nationally, whether you're looking at the Canadian workforce or the American workforce or even the European Union, you're repeatedly seeing information that is collected from these surveys that says that having jobs that provide a work-life balance to staff is really important. And we do have laws, like our Employment Standards Act, do have laws that help to protect work-life balance. So it tells us how many hours in a day we can staff people, how many days in a week a person can be staffed, the conditions of the work environment, how to make sure that it's safe, and to protect people from a workplace illnesses and accidents. Those are all about maintaining work-life balance for our staff. And we do have survey data that has shown that 1 in 4 were burnout from their work, so they get overly stressed and have negative responses to the amount of work that they have. And we don't want staff to be burnt out, because that affects their engagement, their motivation, and whether they want to stay with us. So we have to work to develop policies and programs that encourage work-life balance amongst our staff. We need to communicate with our management on how to best work with their staff, so that they don't get burnout, so that they don't get stressed out from the work volume that they have. And really, if we want to attract top performers, we have to recognize that if people are saying this in surveys, that's what they want in terms of benefits when they come to work for a company. They want to see not that their pay is being fair and representative of the skills that they're bringing to the organization, but also that the job provides benefits and flexibility, recognition, and a sense of autonomy, so that they can feel a sense of reward and a sense of work-life balance when they work for your company.